Good days. We are live in the Element Wealth Studio. We're pleased to welcome now the Congressman who represents Mississippi's 3rd Congressional District, Michael Guest. Congressman, always good to see you, sir.
Gerard, good to be home, and thanks for having me back on.
You bet. So you're home for a couple of weeks, right?
No, just this week. So
okay, just this
we were 2 weeks in D.C., home this week, and then 4 more weeks. So the 6 of 7 will be spent in our nation's capital. I do get home on the weekends, but those weeks fly by, so it's good when I get to be home, spend some time in the district, and get to come on in person instead of having to do it by phone.
I know that, and we appreciate that, and I know that many of the opportunities I've had to catch you speak and provide updates to the various groups around the district on what's going on in the Capitol, you always make the statement about and the contrast, I should say, to the good people here in Mississippi and the environment in Washington. And I can just tell you're certainly more comfortable being around here with your fellow Mississippians.
Look, when I'm home, I'm around people, like-minded people, conservatives, people with morals and values and common sense, things sometimes in short supply in our nation's capital. And you're right, when I'm home, I enjoy getting out. Got a chance to speak to a group of about 200 in Madison on Monday. Get out and travel throughout the district. So it's always good to be home, meeting with elected officials, community leaders, making sure that we're keeping a good pulse on what's happening here in Mississippi and how then we can be more effective in Washington, D.C.
Well, besides the policy and the legislation that you guys have been working on, something that we've been talking about a lot on the program and is certainly gripped the nation and received lots of attention are these anti-Semitic protests on our college campuses. Congressman, I got to tell you, it's unbelievable, it's surreal, it's disheartening, it's disturbing that this is happening in America.
It is, and it's interesting to me when you see some of these people actually go in and try to start interviewing the people who are there protesting, asking them, why are they protesting, what changes do they want to see, and most of them don't have any idea, at least the ones that will agree to interviews, what they're upset about, and why they're mad. I know that all this relates back to Israel and what's happening in Gaza, but I think a lot of people forget that what happened what is happening now is a direct consequence of October the 7th, when Hamas, who runs the Gaza Strip, invaded Israel. They killed almost 2,000 civilians, took several others hostage back into Gaza, and Israel had to respond. And Israel's response is, we're going to do everything we can within our power to wipe out Hamas, the terrorist organization who calls Gaza home, and that we're not going to stop until that's done. And I think if that would have happened to our country, to the United States, if, say, somewhere along the southern border, if you would have had a group of individuals, whether it be a terrorist group or a drug cartel that would have come in and killed U.S. citizens and taken others hostage, I think we would have had the exact same response. And so what we're seeing is, I think, is very disturbing. And I think people need to think back. It's been less than 100 years when we saw what we saw happen in Nazi Germany. We saw the demonization of everyone of the Israeli race, which ultimately led to the extermination of Jews in concentration camps. And we need to be very careful that we don't get back on that slippery slope ever again.
It does feel reminiscent of 1930s Germany, honestly, when this stuff was starting to evolve and bubble up, and then of course the rest is history with World War II and the atrocities that occurred under Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, and as you and I know, and hopefully most of your listeners, Israel was created after the end of the Second World War to actually give those of Jewish heritage a place to call home. And the area that they were located was really no man's land. There was no country, no nation that called that home. The United Nations gave that land to the Israeli people, and then again that was the land that God had promised Abraham going back into the Old Testament. And I'm proud to say that the U.S. was the first nation that recognized the nation of Israel. And ever since that, in the mid-'40s, we have been standing beside our closest ally in the Middle East. And so I'm glad to see that we are continuing to stand with them and support them. providing them the military aid that they need. And as we see, the events in the Middle East are very fluid right now. We saw the attacks just over a week ago when Iran sent cruise missiles and drones of a substantial number toward Israel. And because of Israel's advanced technology, some of the missile defense, because of some of the allies in the region, they were able to shoot down or destroy most of those rockets and drones before they reached the territory and the targets. But we're seeing that the conflict in the Middle East is real, and we need to continue to stand with Israel.
Something that's always perplexed me, I guess is a good way to put it, Congressman, is why the Jewish community seems so supportive of Democrats who don't seem to reciprocate support for them.
It is a question that that really requires people to really take a second look. I mean, I think historically people have always felt that the Democratic Party has been very supportive of the nation of Israel, but we've seen that begin to shift and change, particularly with the progressives that we now see in Congress. People like Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders. Many of these people no longer have that steadfast support for the nation of Israel that we've historically seen, and they've been very critical. We saw Nancy Pelosi actually just earlier this week call for the resignation of Benjamin Netanyahu, and I will tell you that's none of her damn business.
But not the president of Colombia, whose campus is in chaos.
That's right, or not our president, who has an open border and inflation, right, and continues to add to the national debt. I mean, and so again, as we see the Democrat Party continuing to move further and further left, they are pulling away from Israel, and they are much more supportive of anyone that they consider supportive of any sort of Palestinian state or Palestinian actors, even to the point that they will support terrorist organizations such as Hamas and Hezbollah over the nation of Israel.
When Ronald Reagan was governor of California, I remember that back in the 60s, I remember during his tenure, he deploying the National Guard to Berkeley, where there was continuous protest, mainly against the Vietnam War, just to maintain safety on the campuses. Do you think maybe this president should act in the same way? Should we deploy perhaps the military, the National Guard, to maintain safety?
I mean, I think he should be prepared to act. I don't know that we've quite reached that point yet.
Okay.
But, again, what you see that's been happening in Columbia, to a lesser extent, Yale, UC Berkeley, we know that those are schools. We see, or I read that even other schools such as UCLA in Texas, that they're beginning to start to organize students to have these mass protests. And if it comes to that, yes, I think the president needs to be prepared to act if requests are made by the governors of those states, that we need to be able to step in, and we need to be able to keep law and order, and we need to be able to protect those Israeli students, people who are maybe United States citizens, but who are Jewish in faith. We need to be able to protect them so that they're not targeted like we've seen in just the last few days and few weeks. And so, yes, I think it is a very serious situation. We need to be prepared to act, and if at all possible, to prevent them from those demonstrations, and also some of the mass demonstrations that we've seen. The Golden Gate Bridge. We saw individuals shut down the Golden Gate Bridge there in San Francisco, California, for hours protesting. And so they get out in mass areas of traffic. They begin to protest, and they bring everything. They bring the economy as a whole, grind it to a halt for their political purposes. And if they do that, they need to be arrested and prosecuted. They don't need to get some slap on the wrist and pay some $500 fine. Those people should be prosecuted and held accountable if those are the types of actions that they are committing.
I mean, that's an abuse. That's not exercising your First Amendment rights. That's abusing them and imposing on the rights of others.
You're exactly right, and that's someone who doesn't want to be able to sit down across the table and talk about issues. Those are people who think that they have the moral high ground and that they're right and that we're wrong.
When we come back, we've got Congressman Michael Guest in the Element Wealth studio. We'll dig into some of the recent legislative activity, including what just passed in the Senate, came out of the House, passed the Senate, 4 measures that will provide funding to Ukraine and Israel the Indo-Pacific area, and then possible ban of TikTok as well. Congressman Michael Guest is our guest in the Element Well studio. Before we go to break, I'm just going to make a statement here. I wonder if this on the college campuses is not a manifestation of this constant appeasement and placation, going back to this safe spaces stuff and all that nonsense. Are we seeing that play out now? We'll talk about that on the other side of the break with the Congressman. Stay with us. Everyone, it's middays from the Element Well studio. Congressman Michael Guest represents Mississippi's 3rd District in the studio with us. So, all right, Congressman, over the weekend, controversial measures that have focused the spotlight on the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, for sure. Think I can get this right. 4 bills, funding for Ukraine, $95 billion total, funding for Ukraine, funding for Israel, some funding for the Taiwan Pacific area.
Indo-Pacific.
Yep, concerns about that. And then a separate bill that I think a couple of major provisions. One is the requirement that TikTok, the parent company, divest itself of the CCP to continue to operate in the United States. And the other would allow the United States to liquidate some assets seized from Russian oligarchs and use that to help offset some of the Ukraine funding. That passes the House.
Has passed the Senate.
Now has passed the Senate as of yesterday.
And will go to the President sometime today.
And get signed likely. So tell the folks how you voted.
I will. And so you're right. So you had one bill that had 4 major components. You talk about the sidecar bill with TikTok, the ability to liquidate assets which are currently frozen in the United States to help offset some of the cost of this. And so that portion of the bill I supported along with the rest of the Mississippi delegation. Okay. To me, there was nothing extremely controversial. I know that there are some people who have concerns about forcing ByteDance, which is a Chinese company, to divest itself of TikTok. It is not a TikTok ban. ByteDance has a year to divest or sell their interest in TikTok to some other company that is either a United States company or a company that's based in one of our allied nations, Europe, EU, places of Australia, places of that we have a great deal of trust and relationship with. And so they have a year to do that. There are several people who have already stepped up and said that they want to make an offer on TikTok, and so ByteDance will have that ability to divest, and so people will have the ability to continue to use TikTok. I know it is a popular social media site. Mm-hmm. While I don't use it personally, I know particularly those of the younger generation that is one that they frequent quite often. And so that portion of the bill had complete support of the Mississippi delegation. You look at the bill dealing with the Indo-Pacific, particularly with what we're seeing with China and Taiwan. The price tag on that was just over $8 billion. Of that, almost 3.5 was investment back in the United States in our submarine infrastructure. Had roughly $2 billion for an additional Columbia-class submarine. It had some funds in there to help improve some of our dry docks and some of our facilities. And so if you look at that $8 billion, at least 3.5 of that will be spent here domestically to help with our Navy as we continue to upgrade and build more submarines. So I voted in support of the Indo-Pacific portion. Moving to Israel, I voted to support the Israel portion of the bill. It was roughly $26 billion. A lot of that money, or a substantial portion of it, went to resupply Israel to backfill the Iron Dome, David Sling, which are 2 of the weapon systems that they use there in Israel to fend off rocket drone attacks. Also, some money went in there for the continued development of the Iron Beam, which is a laser-based system. So the other systems shoot rockets or missiles, which would strike other missiles. The Iron Beam actually uses lasers to do that. It is something that has just recently come online, but it is a very cost-efficient way to intercept many of the projectiles that are being sent. And then there was a large portion of that also that went to help backfill some of the munitions that have been used in the conflict in Gaza as they seek to stomp out Hamas. So I voted in favor of that. And then the final provision was a Ukraine provision.
Yeah.
It was the largest portion of that $95 billion.
60, I believe.
It was just over $60 billion. Now, I will say that some of that money did go to backfill weapons that we have already sent, weapons systems and ammunitions, to backfill domestically so that we have a supply here if we ever need that. But that was a particular portion that I did not support. And the reason I didn't support is not because I don't have sympathy for the Ukrainian people and what's happening over there. It's not because that I have any support for Vladimir Putin and what's happening in Russia. But we've been told, and I say we, Republicans in Congress, in the House, have been told repeatedly by our leadership, both the current leadership and the prior leadership, that we were going to use aid to Ukraine as a vehicle to get border security. Because we knew that aid to Ukraine was something that the president was extremely interested in, that that Democrats in the Senate were really pushing. And so we saw that as our opportunity to get additional funding for the border, but more importantly, to get policy changes. To reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy, to force the Biden administration to once again begin wall construction, to end the catch and release program and the mass parole that we've seen of immigrants that are coming across the border and being allowed to come into the country. And so for well over a year, we have been promised, our delegation, all the Republicans have been promised that this is the vehicle we were going to use. Because, look, we could pass standalone legislation and send that to the Senate, and we've done that. We did that with H.R. 2. We did that last spring. We sent H.R. 2 over to the Senate, and it sat on Chuck Schumer's desk. He has refused to bring it up for a vote. They've refused to do anything on the border, and so this is what we felt was our best opportunity to be able to get some changes, some real changes that would make a difference on the border. And our leadership decided to go a different route. And so because of that, because of the continued support that we've seen, and because this was what we had decided that we were going to use, this was going to be the wall that we were going to die on, the hill that we were going to die on. We were going to use this to push for those changes. And when we didn't, not only myself, but more than half of the Republican conference voted against the Ukraine funding. Now, it ultimately passed because it had widespread support from the other side of the aisle. The large majority of the Democrats in the House supported that. And so it was part of the total package. But I did not support that Ukraine funding, nor did Trent Kelly or Mike Ezell from Mississippi. We were all united in our opposition to the Ukrainian funding.
It goes over to the Senate. It passed, was it 79-18, I believe, was the final tally, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe both of our senators did vote in favor.
Yes.
Now, when it went, why was it packaged up like that? From the four separate bills to one measure?
But because we were concerned in the House that if we just sent it over there, that Chuck Schumer would just take up the Ukraine funding.
I got you.
And would have left Israel, would have left the Indo-PACOM, would have never take up the TikTok ban or the use of the frozen Russian assets, that he would have just passed that portion of the legislation and the rest would have died in the Senate.
I don't get it. I really don't. I don't get it. And why would Senator Schumer, Leader Schumer, who is Jewish, why would he oppose funding to Israel?
Well, I think he's, again, attempting to walk that fine line, particularly of the far left. You see Bernie Sanders. The Democrats wanted restrictions on any aid to Israel, and those restrictions being basically they pull out of Gaza and allow Hamas to reform there. And the House was adamant, we're not going to put restrictions on Israel on how they can spend funding for lethal military aid. And so we refuse to put those provisions in there. But if this bill would have originated in the Senate, I feel very confident that any aid to Israel, that there would have been restrictions that the Democrats would have tried to place on that aid.
Yeah. So with respect to immigration reform, which kind of alternates with inflation and in economic matters, the economic condition of the country, as the top issues to voters. We have a bill, a measure that passed the House, H.R. 2. It never got, and is not going to be taken up as long as Chuck Schumer's in charge and the Democrats are. I mean, that was fairly sweeping, comprehensive immigration reform, right?
And it was, and and we believed, those of us who helped draft that legislation, that would substantially impact the surge that we've seen on our border. And we've told Chuck Schumer, look, take the bill up. If you don't like certain portions of the bill, amend it. Take it out. Add things in there. Send something back to us, like we see in the Mississippi legislation. I mean, in the Mississippi legislature, if the House sends the Senate a bill, they routinely will take that up. If they don't like portions of it, they'll make changes. They'll send it back. You go to conference and you try to work out your differences.
Sure.
That's not happening in the United States Congress. Chuck Schumer is not taking that up, and he is protecting the Biden administration by not allowing the articles of impeachment to go forward against Secretary Mayorkas.
So do you feel like the president is instructing Senator Schumer, hey, don't do anything on immigration here. Don't take this H.R. 2 up?
With the presidential election coming up, I feel confident that Schumer is trying to do everything he can to protect the president and his incumbents who are in vulnerable districts that will be on the ballot in November.
And it seems their M.O. is really just refusing to accept or acknowledge there's even a problem at the border.
Bury your head in the sand.
Unbelievable. You guys got to go? You can hang around a little bit more?
We can hang around one more second.
Okay, we got Congressman Michael Guest in the Element Well studio. We're coming right back, folks. Element Well studio, our guest is Congressman Michael Guest, represents Mississippi's 3rd District. So on the C Spire text line, Thomas in Greenwood would like to know if you would be willing to support vacating the speakership.
I do not support vacating the speakership. I continue to support Mike Johnson. And look, I don't agree with every call that Mike's made. I disagreed with his call as it relates to separating the border in Ukraine. I thought that was the wrong decision to make. But, if we look right now, Republicans have a 1-seat majority in the House of Representatives. Mike Gallagher from Wisconsin officially resigned his seat effective this weekend. And so we've got a 1-seat majority. And we have a party that has individuals who are very conservative. And we also have a party where we have individuals like Brian Fitzpatrick of New York, who is a Republican in a D+5 district. And so the votes that he can take and the votes that I can take or others are not necessarily the same if you look as to what's going on with your constituency. But we've seen President Trump has come out and has basically offered his support for Mike Johnson and saying that, look, Mike Johnson has inherited a very difficult situation, that he is doing the very best that he can under the circumstances. And look, Mike's a good man. I know Mike, knew him before he became Speaker. He's from our native state of Louisiana. He's a man of faith. He's a family man. He shares our morals and values. And he is trying to navigate the Congress at a very divided time. We being Republicans, control 1/2 of government by a single seat. We don't control the Senate. We don't control the White House. And so I'm going to continue to stand by Mike Johnson. And I understand Marjorie Taylor Greene's frustration, her and Thomas Massey and Biggs and those others that have come out stating their frustration with leadership. And I feel that as well at times. But I don't think this is the right thing for us to do to make a change. And the other problem we have, Gerard, is then we have to find someone who is going to be able to step up and get the votes, Republican votes only, because we know if Mike Johnson is removed, that Democrats will not vote for a Republican, that we can unanimously 100% support without losing a single vote. And I'll tell you, I don't know if that person exists in Congress right now.
I'm not sure there's anybody that not only who is able but willing.
That's right.
At this point, because it's a pretty tight deal.
It is.
you get elected, and you step out of line with this ability of one member to call a motion to vacate the chair. I mean, that could happen at the drop of the hat. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, by the way, on the news channel this weekend said that when they get back, she's gonna go ahead and invoke the motion. So there's privilege motion, and right now it's just she's made it. But is that right? She has to invoke privilege to force it onto the floor immediately.
So she has filed the motion to vacate the chair. She can then come up and make that motion privilege, which basically just she has to appear in the well of the House. She has to basically announce her intention, and once that happens, then the clock starts ticking. And there is a 2 legislative days process where either that motion has to be heard, or some sort of intervening motion, such as a motion to table, would have to be successful. And so we will see if Marjorie brings that up when we return next week. Again, there's others that have now co-sponsored that. There's people that were angry with the Ukraine funding and how all that shaped out, and us not going forward with the border security. But I hope that cooler heads will prevail. I think that if the House is thrown into chaos once again, like we were when McCarthy was thrown out of office, as we get closer to the election, I think that that's going to have negative impacts on Donald Trump and negative impacts on our ability, Republicans' ability, to maintain a majority. People want to know that Republicans can govern, that they can trust us to go to Washington, D.C. And govern. And if we go through another contested speaker's election where we have several weeks without a speaker, I think that impacts us politically as we go into a very crucial election in November.
Do you think that if she proceeds in this fashion, invokes her privilege, and then we've got you said 2 days, 48 hours in the process, what do you think the outcome will be?
I am confident there will be a motion to table that will be filed.
Yeah.
If Democrats support the motion to table, and we get a handful of Democrats, 8, 10, 12, to offset the defections in the Republican Party, Mike survives. If they choose not to, then Mike will be removed from Speaker, and we will go through that process once again.
Honestly, I just don't see how the outcome changes.
It's Groundhog Day. We're doing the same thing all over again and expecting a different outcome.
That's exactly right. Congressman, always good to see you, sir. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Gerard.
Yep. Coming right back, folks. We got Fox News, Super Talk News.